Good morning. Welcome to this accountability and performance meeting. I'm Jonathan Ash-Edwards, Police and Crime Commissioner for Hertfordshire. I'm joined by Charlie Hall, Chief Constable for Hertfordshire Constabulary. I'm just going to just outline the purpose of the meeting for the benefit of members of the public who've joined us, and some housekeeping before we get into this morning's agenda. So the purpose of the meeting is that the Police and Crime Commission has a statutory duty to hold the Chief Constable to account for the Constabulary's performance. We're now doing that through a monthly webcast meeting to give some public visibility. And so these meetings will discuss a range of crime and policing issues which have importance to the public, as well as items that are important for me to discharge my statutory responsibilities on behalf of the public. The intention is for these meetings to be strategic and constructive, both in terms of providing reassurance where things are going well and scrutiny over areas where improvements could be made. The Police and Crime Commissioner does not interfere with operational independence of police officers, and so these meetings won't discuss individual cases where there are established procedures for members of the public to raise any concerns through the complaints resolutions team in my office. The meeting is being webcast. A recording will be published on the PCC's website thereafter. And for those members of the public watching live, you're very welcome. It's not possible to contribute to the meeting as the webcast is in watch-only mode, but I hope you will find it useful nonetheless. So that's the housekeeping done. On the agenda this morning, we've got four topics. I'll go through the order they'll be in. So shoplifting and retail crime, theft of vehicles, early release of prisoners, and the code of practice for victims of crime. We'll take them in those in that order. So I'm going to start off then with shoplifting and retail crime, which is an area of concern to the public. It's an area that a lot of shop workers are concerned about in terms of the impact on them and their work. We've seen over recent years a trend of increasing shoplifting nationally. The Hertfordshire figures are kind of broadly in line with that. So my first question really is what's the Constabulary's approach to tackling shoplifting and retail crime, and what are the current trends we're seeing?
Okay, thank you. Very happy to work through how we're dealing with this. And as you rightly say, we recognise that shop theft has been a local and national issue that's grown in the last few years, and concern around that for not only the loss it causes, but also some of the threats and violence that have been associated with that as well. So as you say, there have been increases nationally, and in terms of our recording in Hertfordshire, we have largely mirrored that, and we have seen increases in reports of shop theft. And this year, since April, compared to the previous April, we've seen a further increase of just over 6% in terms of offences that are reported through to us. When we look at our detail as to where that comes from, much of the reporting comes from a smaller number of premises. We've certainly seen increased reporting practices that we've come from some of the big chains, big supermarkets and things like that. We know have tightened up their procedures as they work to support their staff, rightly so. So they have come through. But it's not just there, we've seen it in other areas as well. In terms of our approach to dealing with this, there's mainly two main strands that we look at. One is around trying to work with those locations that are reporting the most shop theft, and what we can do to help them prevent that, improve their systems, improve layouts of stores, use the best practice there is to make it more difficult for thefts to take place in those locations. And then on the other side, we've got a strong focus on those people who are offending and what more we can do to put tighter controls around those. And broadly, we see that the offenders fall into one of three categories. There is the complete opportunist, just takes an opportunity to steal something. There are those who are more prolific in the local community, and that we know that we come across on a regular basis, who have a shop theft habit, for want of a better word, that we need to address and intervene with. And then probably at the higher end, we know there is a smaller number of organised crime groups that often travel around the country and undertake this on a very organised and significant basis and hit stores in that way. Quite often the losses that they cause can be really quite significant, and we need to address each of those in different ways. In terms of, if I look at where we are with the preventative work, so we have been, we keep across each of our 10 areas that we police across the county based on the district council boundaries. We ask all our teams in there to maintain a list of which stores, which locations are being targeted the most and having the most reports come through on. And then we there's analytical work that they've got that enables them to produce that. And then we are asking them to put in place preventative plans, working with those stores to try and reduce the likelihood. And that work continues to work through. We draw down the best practice as a national best practice guide. So we will work with them around how effectively their CCTV is operating, what the quality of the images is, how are they using it, how are they drawing that off, how are they able to provide that detail to ourselves, what's the layout of the store look like, the valuable things or things that tend to get stolen. It's not helpful to us or to them if they're easily accessible at the front of the store so someone can come in and clear them out. So we encourage them to put things like alcohol towards the back of the store, away from the store, so it's not quite so easy for that sort of offending to take place. We talk to them about how you might, if it's got security on the store, how we might see them operating most effectively, how they might take details of vehicles in their car parks, if they have one, what their automatic number plate recognition may be. All of these things will help investigate and help to discourage theft taking place as well. And where we've done that, we've already been able to see this year alone with a number of stores some quite sharp reductions as a result of preventative effort and joint working that we've put in place within that. And whilst I won't name stores directly, that involves some supermarkets. So a supermarket in Watford where we've been able to address a particular peak in offending that was seen in around springtime. That's come down much more to better levels, 60-70% reductions in a store in the Chesham area over in Broxbourne. And then we've also worked with some service stations as well, and one in particular in the west of the county, we've been able to see a 67% reduction in offending as a result of that. And then alongside that, what we've also do in each of our districts, if we identify a list of prolific offenders, we've got a top 10 list. Those lists are constantly changing as people come on and move off those lists, but we ask our districts to then work up plans against each of those to try and reduce their prolific offending habits. Often that is being able to get them before the courts, and increasingly we're asking the courts to issue criminal behaviour orders, which can put restrictions on those individuals as to which stores they have access to, which maybe to stop them entering town centres and put restrictions on there. And if they breach them, that gives us additional powers to bring those individuals back before the courts. And then there's wide work outside of that. So some of those we will manage within our offender management schemes, working with other organisations, perhaps drug treatment agencies, probation service and the like, to try and address the underlying factors that is driving their offending behaviour. So I'll probably stop there and just
No, that's really useful. Thank you. And actually, when I've been out on visits with officers, I've seen some of some really good work being done around preventative work, and perhaps some of the frustrations as well, where officers have given that advice and it maybe hasn't been taken, and some of the challenges in some cases with retailers around things like CCTV. I wanted to ask. There's a few things to dig into there. One of the really common sort of public views around shoplifting is that policing doesn't investigate and doesn't deal with shoplifting under the sort of £200 value. Is that the case in Hertfordshire, or is that a public myth?
It is a complete public myth, and I'm not entirely certain how it's got out there, because we have heard that, but it's categorically not true. We have no policy around unless it's over £200. We're not interested in not going to get engaged with it, and. Just to underline that, I asked my team to go and look at the last 10 cases of shop theft that we've charged individuals, and to tell me what value of stolen goods that related to. And of those 10, none of those cases were where the goods have been over £200. One of the 10, the value is not known, so I don't know. Of the other 10, of the other 9, I've got documented what values they were. The highest value of those 9 was £177, but seven of those 9 is under £100, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 of them were below £50. Okay. So. I think that's very real evidence that we are charging and putting before the court people who have committed shop theft well below the £200 figure. One thing that we do is, in making the decision when people have offended as to what is the appropriate route to take them through an outcome, be they charge them before court or consider other out-of-court disposals, maybe a police caution in some cases, or other diversionary activity. We operate a matrix that includes a number of factors that helps determine a scoring to that. Yes. So things that would add gravity and be aggravating factors is perhaps where an adult has encouraged a child to steal, where someone is particularly prolific, where violence may have been offered or used, would make it much more likely that we are going to charge. And there's other factors that make it slightly less likely. One of the factors within there is when the value is higher, and the threshold that one of the things that we talk about in there is if it's over £200, that's a particularly aggravating factor that pushes us down that route. But I stress that is only one of a number of factors, and quite often, as I've already evidenced in terms of what we charge, a low value theft with other factors that are present will always put us into that charge scenario anyway.
Thank you. That's really reassuring to hear, and actually, quite striking that 4 of those the last 10 being below £50, and I hope retailers will find that reassuring that robust approach is being taken in Hertfordshire to shop theft of all levels. That's really useful to understand. Thank you. I wanted to ask a question about how, perhaps picking up slightly on that point around the aggravating factors, how the Constabulary prioritises attendance of reported shoplifting offences, and the things that will influence the type of response that's decided on. Obviously, it's quite a lot of concern from shop workers around assaults. Obviously, I don't anticipate that that's something that would drive a particular kind of response. But what would go into those decisions around what kind of response is coming from a reported shop theft?
So almost all of our reports of shop theft will come into our control room. We called in by stores. Some may be made direct to patrolling officers, but majority would come in here. And within the control room, we operate an assessment process which we call Thrive, which assesses a number of factors: the threat caused by the incident that's been called in, the harm cause, vulnerability, the ability to investigate, and those factors, and they're all set out for the call handlers to work through. Based upon those assessments, we then determine what our response and deployment needs to be to those incidents, and on occasions they will be classed as immediate calls, which we will respond to with blue lights, attend that way. Others we may determine does not require that level of heightened response, but we will still respond. We may schedule an appointment in, and in some cases we can take the details themselves over the phone. And stores have ways of submitting any evidence they've got directly to us through that. The factors that tend to lead us to attend there and then will be if the offenders are still there, they're on scene. Sometimes they've been detained by the stores and they're being held at the store themselves. So we would always look to attend immediately there. If violence has been used or is being threatened, we would certainly look to attend there and then. If there is very clear evidential opportunities, damage calls, assaults that have taken place, we would certainly look to attend at that point. All these factors are worked through in terms of determining what our attendance looks like. But there will be a number that are reported where a theft has happened. The offender's not still there. Maybe the evidential opportunities to grab are not very evident. Maybe something that's reported that happened the previous day or something. And in some of those cases, we will take many of those details over the telephone and ask the stores to submit evidence through our website, through links that we're able to provide to submit digital files within that. And then we'll certainly use that. One of the things we do with where we've got good, and this is a reason why good quality CCTV is really helpful, where we've got those images, often we can identify immediately those individuals because officers will recognise people, particularly if they're prolific offenders. Where we don't do that, we now have the ability to be able to run offenders' faces against through the facial recognition software nationally, and if those people have appeared through our custody suites anywhere in the country and we've got their photograph, the technology can then start to identify people and gives us a really good way of being able to follow up those cases.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And when thinking then about some of the hotspots and some of the data you referred to at the beginning, what's the Constabulary doing to ensure consistency of approach and service across different district areas?
Yeah, so if we look at the offences we record, they do differ across the county as a whole, and most areas have seen an increase in reporting, but not all, and there are some of those districts that have shown a bit of a decrease this year through that. So there might be many reasons for that, and one of the reasons certainly is the willingness or otherwise of some stores to report, and we know that some stores and some chains in particular have taken a particularly strong line about reporting to us everything that they have through there. When they are reported, we I need to make sure they are properly recorded by us, and we've got work ongoing at the moment to tighten up even further to ensure everything that gets reported to us is properly recorded on the crime system. Once they're on the system there, it's available to all our analytical resource to work through and analyse, and we've got analytical tools that sit behind that and are able to generate those stores that are reporting the most thefts, and we're able to look at times of day, days of the week, details around what we might know about offenders. And we pull that information and they produce these lists of the top 10 stores, top 10 offenders, and then through that and through other management processes we've got working across the force, we're holding the individual chief inspectors who lead those areas to account to ensure that they are having their teams put appropriate plans together, either for the locations or for the individuals themselves. And we've got force-wide resources that are available to help support them with some of that and some of the expertise they may need to do it most effectively.
Okay, that's useful, thank you. Touched earlier on the kind of different types of offending. I want to just dig into the prolific offending in particular. There's some work commissioned on my predecessor around some of that prolific shoplifting cohort that showed the sort of top 10% of offenders account for about the top 40% of offences in Hertfordshire, and very significant amount of reoffending within that. And so obviously tackling that prolific element is really key to driving down the number of offences. So what's the Constabulary doing to address that really top tier of prolific offenders?
Okay, so we identify who they are to start with. That's the key. And we will then look to put plans in place around each of those. What we often find, and a frustration often for officers, is they do a lot of work on these individuals, put them before the court. They may well get sentenced, but even if they get a term of imprisonment for shop theft, often that is a relatively short sentence. And a number of these individuals will be what we might refer to as revolving door people that are frequently in and out of the prison environment, but often are not, if they are imprisoned, are not in there sufficiently long for the prison service to be able to work effective rehabilitation programs with these individuals. We ensure that doesn't put the officers off, though, continuing to work against them. This year we've been particularly trying to utilise these criminal behaviour orders, which is an ability to put additional controls and restrictions on those individuals about stores they can visit, locations they can go to, perhaps times when they can't go, and they're all designed to address some of their offending behaviour and patterns. That gives us some enforcement activity. Indeed, often there's licence conditions that they get released from prison on. If they're seen breaching that, we will look to engage heavily with the probation service, try and get those people recalled back into the prison environment. And a good number of these then also appear on, we run something called an integrated offender management scheme, which I have a team of officers working closely, particularly with the probation service, but also a number of other agencies, to put very clear multi-agency plans around these individuals to try and address the factors that are behind them. And sometimes it will be lack of housing, the need for drug treatment services, alcohol services, and to address some of the other factors that are in their life that are driving this offending behaviour. So we certainly look to approach it from many angles, but it can be, and I think always has been, often quite a difficult cohort of people to truly get positive results out from the end of it. That said, some do address their behaviour, and we won't stop trying to work with it.
Yeah, and in terms of that increasing use of the criminal behaviour orders, what early impacts are you seeing from that in terms of that step up?
Yeah, well, we have seen that have some effect with some individuals, and in particular in the Stevenage area, they've been very active in getting some of these orders on some of their offenders, which, as I say, may ban them from certain stores. And as a result of that, the team there are reporting back that they are seeing some positive impacts as a result of being able to address and reduce the offending for some of the cohorts. So I think the important thing is we keep the list refreshed on a very regular basis, and people come on and off the list. Yeah. Although I might talk about we may be focusing on the top 5 at a particular time, a month later that top 5 may have completely changed because we've been able to, through some of the controls put in place, address their behaviour, so they drop off it and we bring the next cohort up. So we're constantly refreshing that in that way.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, that's been really useful. And we've heard there's some some increases, but some significant work being done with retailers around reporting preventative work. Really pleased to hear the reassurances around the proactive work being done to address the lower value offending and that myth around £200 limit. And I think it sounds like retailers should take confidence that where they report and the evidence is available and the evidence is provided, the Constabulary will address that.
Yeah, I think maybe just the other point to mention, when we met last month, we spoke about the antisocial behaviour hotspot controls and the additional focus we're putting in there around visibility. Many of the locations that experience the highest levels of shop theft are pretty close, or if not within the hotspot areas that we have identified. So there is increased visibility against many of these locations, not all of them, but a good number, and I'm sure that's helping to contribute as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I'm going to move then on to the second agenda item, which is theft of vehicles. So there's been some work that I know the Constabulary has done recently in terms of crime prevention advice, because we've seen some increase, particularly around keyless vehicle thefts, I think up about 30% in July year on year. So I want to just understand more around how the Constabulary is responding to that. So perhaps just as a bit of an overview, can you talk me through where we are in terms of some of that kind of wider data around vehicle theft and the Constabulary's response?
Yeah, so theft of motor vehicles, it is a bit of a concern for us in Hertfordshire and elsewhere in the country as well. So if I look at our data since April, we've shown a 12% increase in crimes recorded for theft of motor vehicles. And when I break that down, that's we're receiving around about 7 reports a day on average. I mean, clearly that varies a bit day to day, but if you take the period as a whole, it equates to about 7 vehicles a day that we're having reported stolen to us. Many of those vehicles will be found again and recovered. Not all of them are certainly, and there are certain areas of the county where it seems to be more prevalent than others, and rather like the shop theft, we are doing some work to try and identify where those areas are and focus in on that. And in terms of the keyless thefts, because many of the crimes that we do have reported to us do appear to be keyless thefts of vehicles, and I think we probably all recognise that increasingly newer vehicles are, there's many more that are keyless vehicles that are operating through there. So we've got particular work going on in some hotspot areas that we've identified in Broxbourne, St Albans and Hertsmere at present. And not exclusively, but often the keyless thefts are of higher value vehicles, and we know through work that we do nationally is that some of those are either broken up for parts or often maybe shipped overseas as well around that. And so what we're trying to do that, clearly we'll do a lot of intelligence work. Some of it we are sure is organised crime and will involve organised crime groups that aren't necessarily resident in Hertfordshire and are maybe coming into Hertfordshire in order to commit their crime. Clearly, some of our motorway networks running through the county make the county pretty accessible, either to come into the county or indeed to exit the county as well. And the keyless method tends to work through a way in which, through using IT and computers, they're able to mimic the key itself and fool the car into thinking that the key's activating, and then they're able to steal it through that way. There's a lot, I think it's fair to say that the motor manufacturing industry is concerned about this. They are aware of it, and there's a lot of engagement and information sharing going on, cross-policing as a whole into the manufacturing of motor vehicles to be able to try and address these issues and close these points. And we are involved in those national groups and ensuring that we're feeding all our information in there as well. One thing we do often recommend to people who have keyless is to use something a bit like this, which this is a particularly large version. You can get smaller versions. This is a Faraday bag, which you can put your keys into. And the way it works, underneath all the material and cloth here is effectively a wire mesh.
Yeah.
And when you surround something that emits electromagnetic radiation with that, it's called a Faraday cage that you wrap around it, and it effectively reduces or completely eliminates the ability for the keys in this case to be able to emit their electromagnetic signals. And this is a really good way of preventing those signals being remotely picked up by the kit that we know is often used to steal vehicles. So, these are available from various locations, including we have some through police stations. And at night or when people are finished, you just drop your keys in there, and then you can leave them in the house. Pretty safe in the knowledge that somebody's not going to be able to steal the electronic footprint from the key to do that. But I'm really hopeful the manufacturers are going to find a way, and increasingly they're getting better and better at this and addressing some of these loopholes, and hopefully they'll be able to fix that long term for us.
Thank you. That's useful, and I think, as you said, really key in terms of the manufacturer's responsibility in creating convenience for people has created some challenges in terms of criminality, and I think important points there around some of that preventative steps people can take. And I think it is noticeable some of those hotspots, obviously closest to South County, where those transport networks are strongest. In terms of the constabulary's response, obviously, so call most likely will come in probably in the morning. Someone wakes up, finds the car's gone, call come in. What sort of response would the public expect to receive to that, and what would the evidential opportunities be that the constabulary would be looking for in those cases?
Yeah, so we'll obviously take the report and we'll record that. One of the things we will immediately do is log that on the police national computer. That's the national database, includes a national database of vehicles, and we will put a stolen marker on that. So that will mean that if that vehicle is found anywhere in the country and checked by police, it will clearly be shown as a stolen vehicle. So the appropriate response can be taken to that. It will also enable it to be uploaded on things like ANPR systems, which will have a flag. So if it goes past automatic number plate recognition, it should identify it and be able to flag up what that looks like. Equally, sometimes we get members of the public will ring in and report a vehicle that's appeared in their area that they think maybe looks stolen or has been there for a number of days, is out of place, and it enables us to check those quite easily that way. So we'll certainly do that, but also at the time of taking the report, we will see what other investigative opportunities we may have. So whether there might be CCTV, whether anybody's witnessed the vehicle having been taken. Sometimes people may have Ring doorbell footage. That's all good investigative activity. And then if we find the vehicle, we'll certainly make an assessment as to whether we can ask our scenes of crime scene investigators to go and attend and seek fingerprints or other evidence that may be available as well. And certainly, I would say anybody who's had their vehicle stolen, certainly, if there's any suggestion there's any blood or that's been left at the scene, if you find what looks like blood stain on your drive or something like that, please let us know. That would be of huge interest to us because it's a great source for DNA evidence and the like.
Thank you. We've touched then on from the sort of crime prevention support around some things people can do to protect, particularly on the keyless entries. When vehicle offences, vehicle thefts occur, and again, come back to that hotspot approach. Does the constabulary target that local area in terms of that crime prevention advice in perhaps the way that would be expected?
Yeah, we do that. We've done that for some time. We've developed a new series of leaflets, and we will use PCSOs, local teams, specials, volunteers to help target those areas. And the areas that I mentioned as some of the hotspots, that's actively being done at present, trying to encourage people. We've certainly mentioned things like Faraday bags, certainly steering locks, relatively old-fashioned steering locks. Are helpful as well. Anything that can make your vehicle look like it's going to be far more difficult to steal probably mean that they will move on and not attempt to do that, because these people want to be able to do it quickly and in a relatively unseen way. Parking in areas that are well lit or that have security lights that come on if they find movement will certainly be part of the deterrent through that as well.
Thank you. That's really useful. I just wanted to come back on one of the points you made earlier around sort of criminality behind it, and obviously some of this isn't kind of a within county borders type crime. So how's the constabulary working with neighbouring forces and some of the regional organised crime capabilities to get upstream and identify some of those, particularly where it's organised crime related?
Yeah. So around organised crime, we operate many networks, really. So here in Hertfordshire, we've got capability to look at serious and organised crime here. We work very closely with the other police forces in the eastern region, and we share through a regional organised crime unit data, and on occasions they will focus in on organised crime groups that may be involved in vehicle thefts, significant vehicle thefts and high value. So that information is shared. We are in a fortunate position that we operate the same crime and intelligence system as 9 other forces, and 7 of those are in the eastern, southeastern region. So we're very able to share that information with them as well through that. And on top of that, there then some national structures that tries to collate what's being done amongst organised crime groups that may be moving across the whole country and sharing that information across. We also, on a very regular basis, run an operation jointly with Metropolitan Police, Thames Valley Police, Surrey, Essex often come in and play with us as well, which is targeting criminality that is perhaps using the M25 and into and out of all of those locations that I've just mentioned. And we will run control rooms all together, people sat in the same place, understanding what all those assets are doing. And we've seen some great success across a range of crime types, but often vehicle crime features quite heavily in the work that we do with those. And I'm sure we'll be running another one in the near future.
Lovely. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to move on to the next agenda item then, which is the earlier release of prisoners serving standard determinate sentences. This is a government decision, so outside the constabulary's control, but will have some impacts for policing in terms of offence management that I just wanted to dig into a bit. And so the policy decision that the Lord Chancellor, the Justice Secretary, has announced is a reduction in time served for some prisoners on standard determined sentences to 40%, and so an earlier release period. Some categories of offending, particularly around domestic abuse, sexual offences, those sorts of things, excluded from that, and being worked through in terms of getting to 2 tranches in September and then October. So how is the constabulary working to prepare for that, given that it's relatively short notice in terms of the government's announcement and then the bringing forward of those releases, and no doubt some of those will be some of the prolific offenders we were talking earlier. So So how's the Constabulary responding to that and getting ready for those tranches?
Okay, as you say, it's a national decision, a governmental decision. One of the first decisions the new government made, in part to address pressure in the prison estate and spaces. So all police forces are being affected by this. They say there's two tranches. The first is in early September. We have now been notified nationally by the prison service as to who is in that first tranche. So we have the names, we know who the individuals are who are being released. And Hertfordshire has been notified that there are 28 people in that cohort that are expected to come into Hertfordshire. So we are now working with our local criminal justice partners, and in particular the probation service, to understand who those individuals are, what we know about them, what their offending has been that led them to be in prison in the first place, where they are being released to, what the conditions are on the licence that they're being released from prison are, and then how we risk assess their potential further risk once they are released to continue offending, and then to ensure that we can put appropriate support and management plans around those individuals. So that work is underway at the moment, and there are multi-agency meetings that are being held later this month to prepare for those release. Some of those individuals will then be channeled into existing structures and programs that we have to help manage those. So I talked about our integrated offender management unit and team. They will be picking up and helping to manage some of those individuals that get released. Others will be managed, a small number will be managed through our multi-agency public protection arrangements and subject to increased oversight through there. And my understanding is that at present we feel able to manage the numbers that are being released to us, and we have sufficient resourcing with that, and particularly with probation service, because the probation service have a huge part to play in managing offenders in the community as well. If those individuals breach their licence conditions that they've been released upon, we will be engaging very closely with the probation service and encouraging them to breach their licence so that we can return them back through the courts and address that threat in the community. So we know of the 28. I'm told that the work we've already done suggests that maybe up to 10 of those are not actually going to relocate into Hertfordshire. Their intention is maybe to go and stay with family, or go to other locations in the country. So clearly we're notifying those other areas where we think that's the case. And I anticipate that probably also means that there will be a similar thing happening with people who are thought to be relocating to other areas. We may find that some of those instead decide to come into Hertfordshire, but I think it illustrates how that national network is in place, and we will be informing one another if we've got people on our lists that we think are going to go elsewhere, and vice versa. We'll manage that through. And then there's a further tranche of releases that we are planning for in October. We are yet to receive the details of who those individuals will be, but we've been advised by probation service that we roughly expect that will be of a similar sort of number of individuals, and clearly we'll work them through exactly the same process.
Thank you. That's useful. Can I just press then on the point around people coming into Hertfordshire from other areas? Is there any practical difference in terms of the Constabulary's ability to respond compared to people we know are coming back versus people who were expected to go elsewhere? Or actually does that work okay through the process?
Well, I think many of the people who come directly into Hertfordshire. Many of those we've probably already got on our systems and we're aware of, and indeed some of those offenders are likely to be people that Hertfordshire Police have dealt with and have already got some footprint with the likes of Probation Service. And so we will have those records. Those that are coming in from elsewhere, some of those may not have been dealt with originally from Hertfordshire. So the work that we will do is engage with those other police forces. I'm confident Probation Service will be doing that through their networks as well, so that we do understand that history and we can put appropriate plans in place around those individuals. It's going to make our teams busier, some of our offender management teams, and I'm sure probation, because they are going to have more people to manage than usual. But at present, we feel we've got sufficient staffing to deal with the numbers that are being talked about.
That's reassuring. Thank you, because I appreciate both from that point of increased work, but also doing it in a shorter period of time. Over these charges will have an impact on the teams doing that. Is there any? Are you satisfied from the visibility the Constabulary has the kind of pre-release support that you'd normally expect to go in from the prison probation system is going to be sufficient to help with that release point, or are there any risks there in particular?
I think that's probably more a question for some of the other criminal justice agencies and services to answer. I've certainly not, and nothing's been flagged to me that's saying we've got particular concerns around that. Clearly, some of those people may need some support with ensuring that accommodations available, and we know where that accommodation's going. Some may still have drug treatment or other addiction services that they need to support them through that. And that's in part why there is these multi-agency meetings taking place to ensure that, as far as possible, those services will be available that will help support those individuals, and from my perspective, importantly, reduce their likelihood of reoffending once they are back into the community.
Thank you. And my final question then on this one is what work as part of that multi-agency work is being done in terms of sort of the notification and reassurance to victims where people are coming out early?
So that work is being done. Not all of the offending that people are being released for necessarily has a very clearly identified victim on the end of it. Some certainly will. Where there are clearly identifiable victims, then pretty much they will be managed through a victim contact scheme or victim notification scheme, which primarily is managed through probation services for people being released from prison. So we've started to already work with them through that to understand where there has been a change to the release date of an individual from prison, that where there are victims, part of those schemes, that we are understanding who they are, reaching out to them and notifying them. And indeed that work has already commenced with the first cohort that's being released, and victims where they have a particular link with the individual who's been released are being reached out to, notified, and if there's additional support that needs to be put in place around those measures, that's in hand, underway, and being done at this time.
Brilliant, thank you. And we've got very strong victim support services in Hertfordshire, so I know those will be able to provide that support. So that's reassuring. Thank you. I'm going to move on to our final agenda item, which is the code of practice for victims of crime. Chances of being a victim of crime in Hertfordshire is low. Hertfordshire is a low crime county, but if people do become a victim, there are a number of rights that the victims have, some of which sit with policing, some of which sit with other parts of the criminal justice system. The Victims and Prisoners Act has just come into, got rolled just before the general election, and enshrines those into law. It's going to be bringing in some new requirements that will sit with PCCs in terms of monitoring and reporting on compliance. But I understand been some work that Constabulary's been part of in terms of a Ministry of Justice pilot around some of the data that will begin to sit behind that. So keen to just understand some of that in a bit more detail. I know it's quite a complex area in terms of both some of the undertaking and the monitoring of those various rights for victims, but which are important. So to start off with, can you just give me a bit of an overview in terms of how the Constabulary is currently performing on the victims' rights that sit with policing in Hertfordshire?
Yeah, so there's, as you know, those rights all sit within the Victims Code of Practice, which, as you say, has been given a statutory basis now with the recent Act. And within there's 12 rights that are identified, and they're all available on our website if people want to go and have a look at them, or easily found if you Google Victims Code of Practice, they will come up. They cover a range of different agencies, and part of the challenge is working out who's responsible for which of these, and for many of them, is a number of different parts of the criminal justice system have to contribute towards these rights. Some of them are more challenging to measure and report against than others are. So the first right, for example, says to be able to understand and to be understood. So the pilot that you've described, we have, alongside, I believe, about 10 other police forces working with the Ministry of Justice to look at how we might capture data, what data is available, and what is meaningful reporting against many of these within this. There's a few that we particularly focus upon within that. Most particularly is Right 6, which is being provided with information about the investigation and prosecution. And much of that obviously falls to policing, given that we tend to be almost exclusively the investigating agency when victims report to us. So we do measure that, and we've trained our officers and staff as to the expectations around that. And, we're not absolutely where I want to be with that, but at the moment our compliance against that, we find in about 85% of cases, which has been pretty consistent for some time, we are giving the updates to victims in accordance with the timescales that we should be doing that, and keeping individuals informed around where they are against their investigation. And we've got a number of teams that do that. So I have a victim services team that does a lot of that work. But importantly, what they also do right at the very start of this process is that we ask officers, when they first come across a victim, to undertake an initial victim needs analysis, an IVNA, we call it, which is to help us understand the nature of that victim, what their support needs may be, what their contact preferences may look like, whether there's any particular vulnerabilities that we need to be aware of. And that assessment then shapes the ongoing need for contact updates and everything going forward. So the victim services team will very much work off that and ensure on the back of that we are delivering against those victims, the Victim Code of Practice rights in that way. And indeed, for some of those victims, it will then refer those into the beacon service that's commissioned through your office, where a whole range of different specialist support and services are available to help support victims, be they victims of violence, sexual offences, fraud, or a whole different range of victims. And there's an impressive range of services there available for people.
Thank you. And for those rights where it's currently difficult to quantify some of the data, what's being done, and perhaps what was the output of the pilot to try and improve that data and improve the sort of understanding of performance?
Yeah. So one of my assistant chief constables is leading on this nationally across National Police Chiefs Council, and is working really closely with Ministry of Justice around this. And we did run the pilot, as is described, to assess what data we hold, which data we could easily get, what those metrics may look like. And all of that's now been fed back into the Ministry of Justice to consider what metrics they then feel is appropriate to put in place to enable data to be captured, data that's meaningful, data that actually reports well against where those rights are. And we're really waiting for the Ministry of Justice now to come forward with their review on the back of the pilots. But it's going to need to consider things such as what reporting period are we looking at? So, keeping somebody informed about the progress of their prosecution. Well, some of these prosecutions we know, given court times, are potentially taking place, over 18 months, 2 years, in a small number of cases, even longer. So what does a regular reporting look like for that? And we're just waiting now for the Ministry of Justice to come back with a bit more detail for us there. But there's definitely thought going in to how we report on these more effectively.
Okay, that's useful. Thank you. It'll be interesting to see how that comes out from the MOJ and kind of how that feeds into practice. I wanted to just pick up on the right around victims being notified at every stage of the process, and I know that can, particularly when there are technical hearings in the court system and stuff, start getting quite complex in terms of how people are notified and what people are being notified about. So how are the Constabulary monitoring that compliance with that right around some of those hearings and making sure that victims know about those individual hearings and have an understanding about whether they need to participate or not, or what the nature of that hearing was?
So we've put a lot of training into supervisors around what these rights are, what the expectations are. We track the data through some analytical means so that we're able to prompt officers and supervisors as to when these updates should be being provided, and we're then able to measure as to when those updates happen. That's where we get effectively to this 85% figure. The victim services team have a significant part in that. Separately, we also have a witnesses team within our Administration of Justice Department that then particularly pick up the role where cases are going to court and the court are setting dates, and that team is very regularly on the phone to individuals, both victims and witnesses, describing to them what's happening with dates, if dates are being changed or cases are being rearranged, to ensure that victims and witnesses are informed around that as well. I'm also very keen, and we still need to do more work on this, is to be able to try and automate this as much as we possibly can, even working off our crime investigation system, so that it will recognise updates that need to be given and provide those details automatically, perhaps on an email system, or indeed enable people to come and self-serve and have access through our website with particular passwords and codes that we've given them to be able to find out the status of their case. It's quite complex work to do that, but ideally I would wish to get to that point that would be able to automate much of this going forwards, but at the moment our technology is not entirely in the place we need it to be to enable that.
Thank you. And I suppose there'll be probably differences in different cases in terms of how appropriate that might be as well, but certainly sounds like something that's worth pursuing. In terms of the impact then on the teams within the Constabulary working in this area, both from the sort of victim side and the witness side, the legislation has widened the definition of who is a victim of crime in terms of bringing people who've witnessed crime into scope. We've got more being done in terms of ensuring compliance with the code, and more in terms of reporting what that looks like. What are you anticipating in terms of the resourcing of those teams and the impact in terms of all of that going into the system at a time when we know through court backlogs there's going to be more updates over a longer period of time for people.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is a concern. There's a lot of breadth to these rights. They cover a lot of ground, and as you say, the number of individuals are covered seems to be being broadened as well. Add to that, some cases are taking increasingly long periods of time to progress. That means there's even more people in that system that we need to stay in contact with. That undoubtedly is going to put pressure into us. And I think we are going to have to, when we understand in more depth, I think, from the Ministry of Justice, the measures and what's going to be expected, we may well have to look at the resourcing and what needs to be added. But it brings me back to that's why the technology is even more important, because if I can automate more of that, so that it doesn't need individuals to be on the phone, and we're able to allow people either to self-service or to automate the updates, then I should hopefully be able to mitigate some of the cost that otherwise it's never going to bring in. But I think there could be some tensions in how that's going to be resourced going forwards, given that I am not short of other things that need resources too as well. So will certainly be a discussion with yourself going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, it's probably one we'll come back to in terms of both what the landscape looks like post some of those MOJ decisions, and as you say, in terms of what the resourcing of that might look like over the future. Final question for me, just around, we've talked a couple of times there around some of the current backlogs in the system and the impact on victims. Can you just share a bit about how the Constabulary is supporting victims during those longer wait times and trying to keep cases being progressed?
So the much of that work falls to the Victims and Witnesses team that sits in the Ministry of Justice function. So they, when I go and see those teams, they regularly have lists of people that they are ringing, talking to about where their case is in the criminal justice system, what that means for them attending court or not attending court, what the dates are being arranged. So they are primarily doing that. For a number of cases, the officer who's in charge of investigating the case, particularly the more complex cases, the detectives involved there will be in regular contact with their victims as well. And we do recognise that maybe in contrast to what we've seen in the last week or so, where we've seen across the country some really swift justice being handed out on the back of the disorder of recent weeks. Sadly, that's not the case for many of the other cases we progress through the system, and we do know that puts a lot of pressure onto victims and witnesses through that. So much of that work is to ensure that victims and witnesses remain engaged with us, remain prepared to still attend court to get justice as we go forward, and that can be difficult. Particularly, we recognise that often there's a lot of emotion and feeling involved around all of these cases, but particularly where they've perhaps involved violence or domestic relationship arrangements. So we do encourage officers to keep in contact. What's really going to help us is reducing those backlogs and moving to swifter justice and cases being able to be processed by the courts in a much shorter timescale than we've seen, certainly post-COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've certainly seen, since coming to Rock, some really good work being done around some of that victim support of keeping people supported and on the journey. But completely agree with that point around those, the importance of timeliness and kind of the wider issues that we can't solve here today in terms of that kind of wider system impact. But it's good to know that is an issue the Constabulary is very alive to in terms of managing. Thank you, Chief Constable. I'm going to draw the meeting to a close there. It was very useful, and there's a few things there which we'll no doubt follow up on and come back to as well in future of these meetings or other forums. I'd like to thank members of the public for attending. The recording of this meeting will be up on the PCC website in due course, and there'll be a further such meeting in mid-September. So thank you very much, and we'll close the meeting there.